Yeah, show caption. Okay, let's jump in and go ahead and get started, everybody. Um, nice to see you. Thank you, most of you who are here on time, or pretty close to being on time or earlier. I appreciate that. Um, so today we're going to do a couple of quick intros, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. We have two presentations this morning. One is Deb Bennett, who is with the Wireless Infrastructure Association, and want to hear about the grant that they've got. And then also Kevin Sievert. Where'd you go, Kevin? There you are, with Calix, and to hear what they do and the work they do, particularly in the infrastructure space, if I am correct about that, Kevin. And if I'm not, then correct me. But anyway, so just want to do a couple of quick intros. Where did she go? Jamie, do you want to introduce yourself, please? Jamie Sullivan, are you there?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We can now.
All right, great. Hi, my name is Jamie Sullivan. I am with the City of Surprise. I am the dry utilities supervisor and currently working through a lot of these, small cell sites and fiber projects. So just sitting in, listening to what you all have to say.
Great.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you. Good turnout this morning. Thank you all for being here. Is there anybody else that's new? Well, and Jamie, you actually have been here before. I tell people I have a good memory, just a little bit short. Um, is there anybody else that's new this morning that I haven't introduced today? If not, let's just jump into. We have two presentations this morning, as I mentioned. Deb with the Wireless Infrastructure Association and Kevin Sievert with Calix. And so with that, Deb, I'm going to turn it over to you. If you need to share, you're more than welcome to share a presentation or not, whatever grabs your fancy.
No, that's fine. Thank you. And thanks everybody for inviting me to join you today. I'm Deb Bennett, Vice President of Apprenticeship here at WIA. I thought I'd just give you just a little reminder who WIA is. And with that background in mind, it would make a lot more sense on why WIA was recently selected as a recipient of a pay for performance cooperative agreement from the Department of Labor. So just as a little background, WIA has been a national sponsor of registered apprenticeship since 2017. So coming up on 10 years now. And most recently, we were recognized and served as a telecommunications industry intermediary for the Department of Labor. And we did so under an industry intermediary contract. The contract was initially 5 years. WIA was selected as one of three intermediaries to be extended an additional 6 months. So they felt that we were delivering good value for the Department of Labor, and we were grateful to have that particular extension. That contract and the extension period also included pay for performance funds, or they actually called them incentive funds at the time, but WIA put in place a pay for performance model. And what we did for registered sponsors of registered apprenticeship, 9 out of 10 of those came from and registered with WIA and our program known as TIRAP. But nonetheless, that gave us an opportunity to distribute $2.2 million in incentives over the course of that 5.5 years. So we had a lot of experience, a lot of lessons learned, and I think that weighed heavily in our favor when Department of Labor made the recent award. So our pay for performance model at that time was really just strictly focused on adding apprentices to the program. We did so in a tiered structure. Some of our sponsors, our participating employers, have less than 5 apprentices that they ever put into the program. Some of our employers put in 1,200 over the past year. So we really ran the gamut of those really small employers, but they were able to see benefit from some of the incentive funds as well as those large employers. And they both used the funding differently. They were able to use that funds to purchase related technical instruction, use it for program administration, to offset the cost of them devoting some staff members to, and perhaps they needed equipment for their training facilities. So that being the background, we believe that's why we were selected for the new opportunity pay for performance that was recently awarded. The gist of our proposal to Department of Labor is really focused on incenting that registered sponsor of apprenticeship with a program in good standing is eligible to come to WIA and work with us so we can evaluate the program, make sure they're meeting the eligibility requirements, and ultimately putting the incentive funds in their hands. So we anticipate over the course of 4 years, we're going to have to at least work with 92 different sponsors of registered apprenticeship. They do not need to be part of WIA's program. They can have an existing registered program. It can be at the national level. It could be with a state apprenticeship agency. As long as they are an active program in good standing, they would be eligible to participate in the program. So keep that in the back of your mind. But the name of this game is ultimately for the Department of Labor is to expand registered apprenticeship. You don't do so without sponsors. And so that's where the emphasis in our program comes from. So with that, we also identified 3 milestones. And actually, the first one was given to us by the Department of Labor. The apprentice has to be employed or retained for at least 90 days before the sponsor is eligible for any funding. So the first milestone is retention, apprentice registered and active for 90 days. The purpose of that is simply to reward the onboarding investment and reduce early stage dropout. Because we've recognized over our years in our role as a national sponsor, that first 90 days can have a lot of turnover. So we want to reward keeping that individual active and engaged for the first 90 days, and they would be eligible for $1,500 at that point. The next milestone really just generally referred to as progression. So once that apprentice completes the related technical instruction, they would be eligible for $2,500. So we recognize that technical instruction is an investment, and we want to build that safety and competency foundation with that apprentice. So milestone number 2, based on completing that related technical instruction. Our final milestone that we proposed is completion of the program overall. Apprentice is then incentivized to stick with the program, attain the credentials that come with the related technical instruction, etc. And we want to counteract any late stage attrition that occurs. So we're going to reward that sponsor for, again, making the investment, keeping that individual motivated, and supporting the apprentice through the completion of their program. At that point, they would be eligible for an additional $2,000. So the total per apprentice that goes back to the sponsor, not to the apprentice, but back to the sponsor to invest in their program is $6,000 for any apprentice that completes the 3 milestones. They may complete 1 and never get to 2 and 3. That'll be a tracking issue on WIA that we'll need to manage. And we've got program management tools that will assist us with that particular process. But that, in a nutshell, is what we propose to the Department of Labor. WIA is not eligible for any of the incentive funds. So what you'll see overall is a $30 million award, with 85% of it being given back to registered sponsors to invest in their programs. Again, based on performance, and in this case, pay for performance is managing and nurturing those apprentices through 3 distinct milestones. So that's any questions on that part of it so far?
Looks like you're good.
And then you get into some other elements of the grant that we'll have to work through here. We've got a meeting with our federal project officer today. So for instance, they want to know what occupations we consider to be part of telecommunications. So WIA has a program. We know our 16. We've got a list of occupations we'd like to develop in the future. But we also know by checking into Rapids and pulling down some reports, there's probably 40 to 50 approved occupations that a sponsor may have active at this moment that are deemed and considered telecom or telecom adjacent. So we'll be working with our federal project officer to determine what that list looks like. And we have to secure their approval on those programs coming in. So in other words, why I wouldn't have, they have an approved occupation called a telecommunicator. What kind of a title is that? And it's really a 911 dispatcher. So why on the surface it
Okay.
may look like it falls in telecom, but that's certainly one that we wouldn't consider being eligible for the program. But then if someone approached us and had that as a program, a registered apprenticeship program, we could refer them over to one of the other recipients. It may indeed meet some of their qualifications, but it wouldn't necessarily meet ours. So we might be a little early on this meeting with respect to what to anticipate, but that's the gist of our proposal. That's why we got the award. And if there are any changes after working with our federal project officer, they do give us 120 days called implementation to work with them to secure these approvals, make sure Department of Labor is comfortable that we all have the same definition of the requirements within the main proposal, et cetera. But we're just getting started and we'll start that process later this afternoon.
Okay. Thank you, Deb. Any questions for Deb? So before we move on, Bill, I apologize that I should have introduced you earlier, although most of the people on this call already know you. But Bill is with the Wireless Infrastructure Association. He is a regular attendee of this group, and he arranged for Deb to be here today. So thank you, Bill. And do you have anything that you want to add?
I don't. I just I thank Deb for spending the time with us. That was I thought she was the best person to give us the overview because she is the TIRAP lead for the organization, and just overall, I think TIRAP has a great potential for employers that can learn more about it and can take advantage of it.
And we have shared with Department of Labor too. If we still manage inquiries that are interested in pursuing registered apprenticeship. We recognize their participation in TIRAP may not be the best fit for them, and that's okay. We want an apprenticeship program that is manageable and suits the business needs of that particular employer, but we'll help them get registered. So that's not an issue. So we still take on that intermediary role, despite not having an intermediary contract any longer. But there's a lot of value in that. So you're definitely meeting the needs of that employer, making them comfortable, providing technical assistance with the program, et cetera. But we'll take that on. So if you've got any inquiries that come in and they're interested about apprenticeship in telecom, send them our way. We'll help them evaluate what works best for them.
Okay. Thanks, Deb. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. And Bill, thanks for arranging for Deb to be here today. I appreciate that.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah. So, Kevin, before we move on to your presentation, Jessica Strum, I saw that you were on the call and you snuck off last week last meeting. I was going to call on you to see if you have any latest and greatest things that you think you ought to share with us. So can I put you on the spot?
Sure. And I apologize, my voice is still a little bit off. I've been under the weather. I had to jump on a separate meeting last week, so my
And
apologies.
Jessica, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, my name is Jessica Strum. I'm the Senior Program Manager at Digital Lift. Excuse me. Speaking of being under the weather.
Yeah.
Right now we're primarily expanding some stuff into North Texas, but we're doing some other partnership work with, excuse me, I'm sorry, with Morphic, which I've mentioned before in the disability access meetings, and to help get some of that out to more partners all over. And Morphic is a completely free tool. It's a download that uses a computers, whether that be Chromebook, regular laptop, or Mac, to put its accessibility settings as a bar on the bottom. I use it almost exclusively for the snip tool, so I have to press one less button. um, but it puts all kinds of accessibility tools, mouse, um, uh, magnifiers, etc., color changing. They're inaccessible, and so especially for public computers, it can be really useful to be able to have that there. So we're doing some more with that with our partners all over, and also modifying some additional curriculum, which will be available in the coming months for updates for some of the latest changes, and then building out some other accessibility teaching curriculum for later. But that's a pending that's a pending date at the moment. And we provide train the trainer training for capacity building for organizations across the board, whether that's a digital literacy focus specifically or to help organizations be able to bring those tools in to be able to expand that out. So a lot of that's health-based organizations to be able to further the work that they're trying to do, especially in rural areas and libraries, etc.
Okay. Anything else, Jessica?
Yeah, just in case anybody hasn't seen it yet this morning, NDIA had a legal court case win for the Digital Equity Act for some of that funding. I'm sure that that will still be in some other layers of courts for a while, but this went through the U.S. District Court in District of Columbia for that decision. I can pop in the link to that in case anybody wants to view the broadband IO article on that came out about an hour ago.
Actually, Aaron Larandos, and Aaron, if you want to jump on that while we're at it, and you've just put a link in the chat about that.
Just a different version of the same information. I'm sure mine came from the Hill. Otherwise, the same information. Yeah. Thanks, Jessica.
Okay. So do we know exactly what this all means and when and how? And or is that expecting too much from the feds?
No, but just to note, and I said this when I
Not
posted
really.
it,
I mean,
but
I basically
yeah.
not.
I was just going to say it only relates to competitive grant. That's the only thing that I think is important to note. It does not relate to capacity grants or any other Digital Equity Act funding.
Actually, you want to explain
Yes,
briefly
and
what the
like
competitive grants are, Aaron, that people may or may not remember all that. It's been a long time.
Sure, no problem whatsoever. The 30-second version is the Digital Equity Act created capacity, well, first planning grants for digital equity for each state and territory. Arizona went through that process and created its digital equity plan, which was approved by NTIA, and we were moving into the next stage, which was the capacity grant program. So states then got money to do what they said they wanted to do in their plans. The other part of the Digital Equity Act was a competitive grant program where entities who were providing services directly to covered populations to break down those barriers could apply directly for funding. That's what this lawsuit was in reference to, because NDIA, amongst many others, were already named recipients. And Paul Ross on this call was also a named recipient of some of that funding. And so this lawsuit related to that part of the funding, not the state's money. And I'm sure Paul has things to say about it as well.
Well, I want to just say I've been looking forward to seeing a decision of some sort come down. So this provides a little bit of light, but as it was mentioned, there's going to be other court challenges. There'll be more things to come. But it does provide a light because we were recommended for an award And so I'm still hopeful because the vast majority of what we had already put forward was very much built around workforce development. And so, yeah, I'm really, there's a little light before there was none. So this provides just a little bit. Hey, sometimes you got
That's
to hang on to what you have. But anyway,
And
that's my thought.
Steve, Mark
Yeah, go
Goldstein,
ahead, Mark.
International Research Center and chair of ATIC. A little more light, and we mentioned it, I think 2 weeks ago, is that part of the NTIA tribal broadband connectivity round three, is for 720 million across two programs, but 250 is represented by the native set aside from that same fund. So that's a little more light that they are actually committing 10% of that original amount that was the native set aside. It's on the street for proposals.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Okay, any other questions or comments about that before we jump into hearing from Kevin this morning? Okay. If not, Kevin, I'm going to turn it over to you. You are more than welcome to share. I think you did have a presentation that you wanted to share, and you are more than welcome to do so. And just
All right.
please introduce yourself and take it from there.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, Steve. My name is Kevin Sievert. I am the Senior Broadband Strategy Manager at Calix. And basically, real quick history about myself. Spent about 16 years working at MCI and WorldCom, so going against the 800-pound gorillas. Then went to Verizon and spent 12 years working for the 800-pound gorilla. After that, and all this has been in transport and access technologies. After that, worked for the state of North Dakota, standing up their broadband office and essentially implementing the ARPA CPF funds and the BEAD program. Left North Dakota shortly after we provided the initial proposal in December of 2023, and I've been at Calix ever since. So basically today, what I'm going to talk about is I'm just going to provide a quick BEAD funding update as part of, being a broadband state director, got to see how the sausage was made. So hopefully it's a little bit of a different view on some of the most recent topics there. Then I'm going to talk about kind of what's beyond BEAD, right? And then I'll provide a really quick review of who Calix is and what we do. So basically, we've got 54 of the 56 final proposals approved by NTIA. California, Illinois are the two that are still being held and in negotiations. Actually, both those states, Ariel Roth, who is I think the assistant secretary to the NTIA, who's heading up the BEAD program. She had to testify in front of a oversight committee a couple of weeks ago, and I believe both of those states questioned her on when are they going to get their approval. There's still some things that they're negotiating. Don't know the details of it, but it seems to be holding things up, considerably from the rest of the pack. 52 of the states have received NIST approval for their final proposal. The two that have not yet is Oklahoma, Mississippi, and then we have 52 of the states and territories have signed their award agreements with the NTIA. DC, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands basically had no BEAD locations, so their funds are going to be going to essentially the programs that will be defined by the non-deployment fund guidance. So just a real quick summary, the good, the bad, and the ugly, for beads. Right now we have multiple states that have confirmed that they've signed all of their subgrantee agreements and are moving forward. We have other states that have announced the execution of some of the subgrantee agreements in their states. And we already have customers turned up in Louisiana and Nebraska. So that's I think we're finally, after years and years of waiting and delays, we're finally starting to see the benefits of bead, and it's starting to turn up customers and money starting to flow. I'd say, the bad is that there's been a lot of delays. The states are still going through the subgrantee agreement phase. We haven't seen, there was supposed to be guidance on the non-deployment funds in March. That got delayed to June. And then in the hearing here a couple of weeks ago, Ariel Roth said that they expect it this summer. So, we're still waiting for that for almost half of the money of the 42 billion to be determined what the states can do with it. And then I'll just say, kind of the ugly part right now that we're seeing is we're starting to see some rescissions of awardees. They're declining their awards for various reasons. Some of the reasons are I know there was at least one acquisition, and they determined that the acquired ISP bead award was not in line with their strategy. I know that there was I think there was some issues with one of the subgrantees on some transparency stuff. Others, the projects have just gotten too expensive over the course of the delays, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. But essentially, we have 3 states that have made official announcements, and it represents about 15% of the total locations that were in those 3 states. Now, if you listen to Ariel Roth's testimony, she mentions a factor of the recensions were only amounted to 1% of the locations. That was for the entire country. So that was, that was certainly tilting the numbers in your favor. But if you look at the 3 states, it is at 15% impact, and we expect to see continued rescissions in the future across other states. South Carolina actually just announced within the last week or two that they had 16 projects in their BEAD final proposals. 8 of them have been removed and are being funded with either the ARPA SLURF funds or state funding. So not sure, I'm not necessarily considering that rescinded, but I am kind of putting it into the group of projects that have been removed from the BEAD program. So kind of, what's driving this? Some of the key challenges for the awardees. We've been on multiple calls with state broadband offices in the NTIA where, there was one example, the fiber cost for this one subgrantee who had a $20 million project. Their fiber cost alone has gone up almost $2 million in less than a year. So a 10% hit on their BEAD project in less than a year because of fiber costs. And essentially, those are the types of things, because the BEAD was run so tight, and the NTI really focused on trying to get the lowest cost solution and the highest match. There really is no room for these unexpected increases that we're seeing in the last year in the telecom. So both so we got fiber, we've got labor. conduit pedestals, enclosures, anything that has a petroleum-based resin, is having issues as well because of the Iran conflict. Also, we have increased costs to electronics with memory surcharges, semiconductor increases, the resins, impacting the PCB. So all of these things are coming into kind of the perfect storm for cost increases that are really taking some of these projects that were right on the razor's edge of being feasible and making them unfeasible to deploy. The supply chain as part of all of that is certainly starting to get stretched out, especially fiber, and that's being driven by data centers. I know we've seen Meta and AT&T announce around $6 billion each in fiber requests for the next several years. That's taken a lot of the capacity of fiber. We've got Amazon, Google, Microsoft, a bunch of other players in the industry that is also going to need a lot of fiber. So again, you know, this was so much of an issue that the NTIA has actually reached out to the major fiber manufacturers, both the fiber strands and fiber cables, to try and get some assurances that the capacity will be there for the BEAD program. We have seen some of those companies stepping up and saying that they will make it available, but that doesn't necessarily represent the entire industry, and it really only helps the customers deal directly with those manufacturers. If you're going through distributors and things like that, we're still seeing that orders are being canceled for some smaller customers going through distributors and being rescheduled, 9 months to a year out, et cetera. The other thing that I think has really impacted awardees is the NTIA had redefined the previous administration's BEAD rules. They came out with the benefit of the bargain last June. Everybody had to get their final proposals in, or not last June, in June of or no, yeah, last June, and they had to get their final proposals in by August. And so everybody worked hard. Some people had to retool their final proposals because there were 3 states that had already gotten approval by NTIA for the final proposals under the old rules. Others had to speed up their programs, but so all of the final proposals went into the NTIA. They were starting to get reviewed and approved. And then in January of this year, NTA released some guidance on the pole attachment rules and fees, which really impacted co-op customers. And so that really put any of the BEAD awarded projects that was owned by an electric co-op into question, and they're going to have to reevaluate the financials on that. The other one back in FAQ, I think it was in March of this year, the NTIA came up with a new requirement that basically said ISPs can't take future federal funding for these locations. So again, those are the things that are driving awardees to reconsider their awards and essentially making the awards even more difficult. Key challenges for state broadband offices. Already talked about the subgrantee agreements and negotiations. Those are very difficult. There's obviously the recensions of some of the awardees. There's some clauses that were in the draft agreements that were causing problems. For example, if you defaulted, then the entire project went to the NTIA and the state broadband office. That was causing issues for some awardees that were using bank loans as their match, because the bank is like, well, wait, if they default, then we need to be able to get our percentage of our match back as assets against the loan, because that's what they're using for collateral. So So there's a lot of those little things that they're going to have to go through. Also, you've got the underdefined requirements around performance testing and the availability testing that the NTIA is requiring. They provided some high level requirements, but there's still a lot of things, a lot of, the devil's in the details, and there are a lot of those details that are still pending. And awardees are signing contracts basically saying we'll follow the performance testing requirements, but they really don't even know what that is. They have a general idea, but they don't know the specifics. We already talked about the awardees declining the awards. Now the states have to reallocate those declined awards. There is a process in place, and the good news is this can happen fairly quickly. Oregon is one of the states that had some awards rescinded, and they were able to turn around in about a month, turn around that process and get the awards reallocated. We talked about the non-deployment funds, but one thing that I will say that was, I think, the sliver of light that we might have is during her testimony, Errol Roth mentioned that there's a potential cleanup round that can use the non-deployment funds to address any funds that might have been left behind by BEAD, and we'll talk about that in a second. As part of these recensions and whatnot, and I talked about Oregon. Essentially, they had Ford awardees that had 15 projects that covered about 13,000 locations. They rescinded their awards. Oregon reallocated those. They awarded that to 6 different awardees. But the big winner of that was Amazon. They picked up 5,000 locations. So what's happening with these award rescissions is there will probably be more locations that are handed over to the LEO and satellite or the LEO companies, and that is going against what I read, like in a Broadband Breakfast article I think earlier this week, that basically said that 4 state broadband offices have been requested by NTIA to reduce their the number of satellite locations in their final proposal. So kind of getting mixed messages there, but we'll talk about that we'll talk about that some more a little bit later. And of course, we talked about the NTIA hurdles and some of the policy changes that they have. There might be other policy changes that are coming that might cause some other problems. So what's next? So I wanted to talk a couple minutes about what happens after BEAD, right? So states are calling audibles. Some of them are already moving forward with finding state funding to do broadband deployments. Wisconsin has defined a $60 million grant, state funded grant that's going to be covering about 30,000 locations. Most of those are going to be satellite locations that are going to be funded with BEAD. Kansas has round 6 of their BAG program. New York has a $36 million program. Indiana has done their round 16 and 17 of their state program, which was in another $1 million worth of broadband funding. So again, the states are continuing their broadband funding programs. They're creating new broadband funding programs to identify and address the locations that have been left behind by BEAD. Hopefully that cleanup round will come up and we'll have a BEAD 2.0 and be able to cover some of those locations that might have been left behind. Also, states are starting to fund, other programs like public Wi-Fi and middle mile programs. So I keep talking about the locations that have been left behind by BEAD. Talking to a couple of the state broadband offices, New Mexico has identified about 9,000 locations that they're going to have to do something with after BEAD that were not part of the BEAD program. Missouri has a few thousand. Connecticut has 3,000 that actually they were listed as served in the FCC BDC. So they were not eligible for BEAD allocation, but just in the most recent FCC updates, these 3,000 locations changed classification from served to underserved. So they're having to come up with a state, they're going to have to come up with a state program to address those, or maybe they can pick that up in the cleanup round. What's driving some of the states and some of these programs is that they've identified that 100/20 may not be sufficient for what they would consider a reliable broadband service, and something that's future proof. Others have defined broadband in state statutes and other mechanisms to essentially, for example, Wisconsin talks about terrestrial, and they basically say in the statute that broadband is a terrestrial service, and that satellite is insufficient to support the needs of what they feel is what they call a reliable broadband service with that's future proof, right? Minnesota talks about a wireline specific broadband technology. Maine basically has identified a program that says that's addressing that has identified locations having broadband that is adequate, meaning the 100/20, but it's not modern. And so they're working on programs that are going to essentially uh, update, increase the capability of any locations that are limited to 100/20. And then of course, that's bringing all of this other things into you. We have satellite, and as part of the benefit of the bargain round, unlicensed fixed wireless might come back into play in the next couple of years, trying to move technology. States might be trying to move those technologies to more of a landline fiber-based technology. On the federal side, that's everything the state's doing. On the federal side, obviously we got the non-deployment funds that we talked about. RUS has I think they just announced another Reconnect 5 last minute award, and then Reconnect 6 is funded. They've got funding for 26 and 27. So there might be some other federal programs that are going to cover some more locations. And then we've got at the federal level a lot of questions about E-rate and USF and the ACP alternatives. And I know New Mexico is looking at state funds to support potential affordability issues, and maybe there's something in the non-deployment fund guidance that will allow states to help affordability issues as part of trying to get the broadband services adopted by all. Certainly, the federal we've seen a lot of federal oversight kind of in the supply chain world. They've introduced routers as part of the the name just shot right out of my head, but they added routers to this essentially the Secure Act, and said foreign made routers are no longer allowed in the U.S. They have just released a component NPRM addressing the manufacturer origin of components for some of our electronics, and of course we've seen in this administration that there has been a big push for BABA requirements and incentives to bring manufacturing either in the US or probably also just out of Asia. So just to kind of summarize where we are I think on the broadband front, BEAD was, I think, a major step forward for many Americans. I think, being able to see how the sausage was made. I think there's been a few missteps, and it's not as good as it could have been. But I think it's still going to be a major step forward. BEAD is not going to be internet for all. There's still going to be folks that are left behind. There's still going to be folks that will have, maybe in Maine's words, inadequate service. And of course, we all know that broadband demand will continue to increase and be more integrated into our lives. I think about a month ago, Mark presented a great deck that gave us a glimpse of the impact of technology and how, that it's going to have in our lives. So I think, the 100/20 is a pretty low bar. I don't think that that's going to be in place for many years, certainly not decades. And that's where a lot of these states are trying to look at or look to for their constituents. And again, we talked about broadband over the next coming years. So with that, I'll just provide a real quick summary of who Calix is and what we do. Essentially, Calix started off as a fiber to the home equipment manufacturer. From there, we really they focused on the tier three guys, and not having worked with a lot of tier three guys in my career, I did get to work with a lot of them when I was in North Dakota. And to tell you what, I found these guys, they're really the salt of the earth. So these tier three service providers, I have such admiration for them, supporting their communities, stepping up when the big guys wouldn't step up. When I went to North Dakota, I think the running joke was, I spent 26 years in the industry, and I don't think I ever said the state of North Dakota in any kind of a work environment. And it turned out that they're one of the best connected states in the country. And that's because of these tier three providers. Anyway, we've grown to over $1 billion in revenue. We've got over 1,600, I think might be even closer to 2,000 customers today. And like I said, we are, I didn't know this one had animation. I stole that from somebody in our marketing group. So one of the things that, I really appreciate about Calix is, not only do we have this end-to-end system, fiber platform, but they've also created the intelligence and the capability for this platform to run. If you think about these tier three providers, these guys are wearing 7 hats. They're wearing a marketing hat. They're installers. They're finance guys. They're funding guys. What Calix saw that need, and essentially they went out and developed. They either developed on their own platform the capability to make these smaller tier three providers, look and feel and run their business like a big tier one provider with all of the functionality. But they've also created a lot of partnerships that will allow them to do that. And so, one of the things that we have partners in all phases of the life cycle or ecosystem of service provider. So I'm part of the funding team. My sole purpose at Calix is to help our customers get public and private funding. We also have design, build, operate, and marketing capability within Calix on our platform and our partners. We also have partners there. So for example, for funding, a lot of our customers being smaller, they didn't have the relationships with the large private funding firms that deal in the broadband space. So we created that relationship, and now we act as a match.com. We can talk to our customer. We can find out what they're looking for. Are they looking for equity? Are they looking for debt? What are they looking for? How big they are? And then we can match them with a private investment partner. And we basically just make an introduction and we walk away. We have no, we have no, benefit from that relationship other than the fact that if they get money, we hope they buy our equipment, right? So just to kind of show you the span, here are all the different these are some of the partners that we have in all of the different areas. So again, very, very wide partnership all the way from consulting engineering to finance to marketing to OSS, BSS systems to construction, etc. So, with that, if you want some more information, feel free to go to our website. If you have any other questions or specific inquiries about some of the different organizations within Calix that you might would like to talk to, feel free to reach out to me. One thing that I did forget to mention, we do have a fairly significant training program. It's called Calix University, and we have a lot of resources in that as well. And we're looking to use that to for our customers, but we also have given non-customers access to that, depending on the situation, some nonprofits, some municipal government organizations, etc. So with that, thank you. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer any.
Kevin, thank you. Great presentation. Very interesting. Trying understanding where we are, what's happening, what's not happening, who's doing what to who, what the feds are doing and not doing. It's quite the challenge. Any questions for Kevin? Okay, before we get into anything else today, Mark, you may have some things and others, but I did want to get to Mala and for Mala for you to talk about the webinar today because that's really important.
I'm Mala Muralidharan, the State E-Rate Administrator for Public Libraries. Yes, today we have the webinar on FCC's proposed changes for E-Rate. I talked about it at the last meeting. FCC had an open meeting on the 25th to propose some changes to the E-Rate program. And these are major changes that FCC is looking at. Should E-Rate be sunset? Should the program be narrowed to only the rural areas? Sorry, I should say E-Rate, for those who are new to it, it is a reimbursement program to reimburse internet and internal connections for schools and public libraries. And you have to apply for it annually based on the school lunch program. The discounts are based on the school lunch program. So FCC has been looking seriously at this. It's been in existence for 30 years. Has it fulfilled its mission? Do we still need it? Don't we? Are there other sources of funding? What would happen if it went away? Do we need to better define SIPA? SIPA is the Children's Internet Protection Act, which is a part of the program. You have to comply with it and have an internet plan for libraries and schools for the children to access. So they want to redefine what SIPA controls. Should network and devices that are purchased out of E-Rate funds limit screen time for kids? That's another question that is asked. Should the eligibility and discount rates be done differently? Right now, it's based on the NSLP data. And another thing that they were considering is the certification of consultants who are working on the E-Rate applications. E-Rate's gotten more and more complicated from the time it was first started, and hence the need for consultants to help with the program, because of course the applicants they're not the experts in the program, but they have to do the application every year and multiple times a year. So this webinar that they have, that Shelby, that is Schools, Health, Libraries, Broadband Coalition, and ALA, the American Library Association, is putting together, will address many of these issues very much in detail. So those of you who are interested, if you're a stakeholder in this, whether you're a service provider or someone who is assisting schools and libraries, this would be a great webinar to attend. I put the link in the chat, so please register. The last I was told yesterday, there were more than 700 people who had registered, so it's going to be a really popular one. So if you have any questions, prepare it ahead of time. Be sure to put it in the webinar chat, because I don't think you'll get an opportunity to talk at this webinar. So back to you, Steve, unless you have
Okay.
anybody has questions.
Yeah, Mo, do you have anything else before we move on?
Just wanted to put, I'm going to put the survey link in the chat. There's an annual survey that Funds for Learning conducts. And 21st is the deadline for the survey. And please be sure to take part, so answer those survey questions. It will be treated anonymously, aggregated, and presented to FCC. FCC really pays attention to the survey results, and Funds for Learning does a particularly good job in analyzing the results. So I'm going to put that in the chat. If you do have a chance, it takes about 8 minutes to complete it. So if you're a stakeholder, please be sure to participate in the survey. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mala. So just a reminder, which I haven't done greatly in the last few meetings, is that you can download the chat. So even though I do send out the chat after the meeting, sometime it'll be a day or two before it gets out. If you want the links that Mala was talking about, or anybody else who put information in the chat, if you go to chat, in the upper right-hand corner, you will see 3 ellipses. And if you click on that, it will say download chat. You can immediately download the chat to your computer. And it's a great way to be able to get all the links and all the comments that were put in chat. Not everything, because as you know, I send out the video and other stuff later. But if you want any of those links, like the webinar that Mala was talking about, you can get those immediately by saving that chat. So just a couple of other quick things. So I don't know, Randy or Mark, or actually Brian Daly, you still on? You guys have anything that you want to add or contribute to the conversation today?
Sure. And by the way, I think that the Kevin's summary was terrific. So that was a lot of just really helpful insight. I guess just a couple quick things. One is Ariel Roth's June 30th testimony before Congress continues to be digested, and it was, I think, 3 hours, and people are continuing to compress that and figure out what that means. And then also, as I think Mala indicated, the FCC is doing a review of all 4 programs related to USF. And like with E-rate, they asked 200 questions just on E-rate alone. And so there's sort of a tsunami of information or NPRMs or things that are being thrown at the public to respond to. And that's actually, and so even organizations that are deeply committed to some of the topics, is just such a volume in such a short period of time on issues that are really, really complex, that it's challenging, but there's a lot of effort to respond. And then the other thing that I think sort of caught my attention, just as one of the most important things, and I think Kevin spoke to this to some extent, was just the sort of the withdrawals from BEAD. And so and part of it, sort of the reasons for that. So for instance, Astound was one of the companies that had 256 million in combined BEAD awards, and they withdrew some of that from Texas and Oregon in particular. And one of the issues with them is they had applied for a whole bunch of contingent area or contiguous areas and were awarded a small subset. And so basically, it was no longer contiguous to their operations. So that was a big deal, and it would be for any operator. There was another situation where there was an operator that was expecting matching funds and didn't get that, so that resulted in them dropping out. And then also the NTIA is reducing the total number of locations specifically awarded to satellite because of updates in the map. So all of the BEAD, the benefit of the bargain was based on version 6 of the map. Version 8 is out right now, and so I'm not sure all the nuances, but just from organic increases in coverage, that's being dialed back. And then one of the really important uh, pieces was with electric co-ops, and basically there's a policy now where if the co-op extends their region by say 5% using BEAD, they need to accept the rules on pole attachments across their whole footprint. And there's been a lot of pushback and dropouts from that, and that's a big deal. But just because so sort of the co-op model for poles is different than sort of the investor-owned utility model in terms of just the way they do things, and so that's also a big factor in terms of participation. And then I think Kevin's noted as well that Ariel Roth said 1%, but we're seeing more like 15% in some of these states. So anyway, those were the most important things that I've come across.
Thank you, Randy. Brian, I see you're still online. Do you have anything you want to add, particularly what's happening in the wireless space these days and satellite and all that kind of good stuff? Are you still there, Brian? Oh, you're there, but apparently you're distracted. So we're about out of time. Mark, did you have anything else you want to add?
Yeah, a few things. I'm glad both Kevin and Randy brought up the disallowing of formerly eligible broadband service locations, which so far has only applied to satellite, which for them is X dollars per uh, subscriber, but probably not a big deal. If that same metric ends up, being applied to terrestrial providers, uh, that's a big problem because if you try to reduce uh, the grant awards by the amount per BSL, a lot of projects have substantial middle mile components to them whose cost is not reduced by the number of subscribers. So I have a evolving concern about that. Um, in the satellite world, Amazon Leo has now announced that they have enough satellites up to begin service this year in some latitudes, so not globally, in certain orbital planes or covering certain areas well enough, but they're going to launch their competitive satellite offering to Starlink. In Starlink news, Starlink has now requested 100,000 additional satellites for broadband. I think they're authorized for up to about 30,000 now. And this is not yet the million satellites they've been discussing for orbital data centers. These are broadband oriented satellites. And then just quickly, two things I put in the chat. There's a great new guide from Community Connect Humanity. Samantha's been on this call before talking about alternative funding. So they just published an alternative funding field guide, building sustainable funding for digital adoption. There's a direct link to the PDF in the chat. And the FCC, interestingly, put out two recent reports. One is their evaluation of their performance from the last year, but more importantly, is their strategic plan for 26 to 30, which not unexpectedly differs substantially from the Biden era strategic plan from 22. And so there is now a good Benton article I just saw yesterday and gave the link to that analyzes the fundamental changes in the FCC strategy between the two plans. That's what I got.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Anybody have anything else that they want to contribute for the good of the order? Dave?
Just a couple of quick comments, kind of based on my own past experience. Number one, I lived what Kevin was talking about for a good part of the 90s, dealing with tier 3 providers versus the big boys, and that's the reality on the ground. Is the tier 3 providers, the more local ones, are just night and day better. So in the mountains in Colorado, when I was going between Vail and Breckenridge was small and local, Vail was TCI, night and day difference. So a lot of encouraging and helping to build out and make it easier for these tier 3 providers, I think is a great long-term goal. I also had one of these unlicensed fixed providers show up in Breckenridge looking to kind of trade their service for free television advertising, and I declined. But they basically left about 100 customers there with $600 or so worth of equipment that worked for a little bit, and then they kind of skipped town. And amazingly, about 10 years later, they showed up in Tubac here south of Tucson, peddling their wares, and they were doing business under the same name with the same people. So I don't know how to clean that up. It's not illegal to have a bad product, but but the bad operators really harm the good operators. And I can't emphasize enough that there is a large amount of money being collected at the local level. It's just not going where it was ever intended in the first place. So for those of you looking for money, there's a lot of it that's already there. For instance, here, I pay a communications fee to be a resident of my town. It cost me 3% more to own my cell phone here than it would if my address was a half mile south in the county. They both have a communications fee, but where I am, millions and millions of dollars have been collected from consumers on what's called a communications fee, and it promptly goes into the general fund and never comes back out. So there's a lot of money, there's a lot of potential for public-private partnerships to get a lot of this fiber in the ground, I think, in a lot of communities. But and our state broadband offices are the best ones to start asking questions about these communications fees, these communications enhancement fees. Where's the money going? So as a suggestion, if there's anyone if you could get some momentum and start to get some people that they take seriously asking the question, where did the $9 million go? And where's it going to go moving forward? Because those fees keep going up. Now, one last thing, I read in more detail the new federal guidelines, and there's a key trigger in there that's going to get a lot of grants kicked out and probably a lot of them called back. And one of the key provisions is you will not get money from the Fed anymore if your grant includes data from studies that cannot be replicated. The replication crisis is absolutely real. And it's not just in the social sciences. About 50% of science, even in economics. I'm looking at the AI assessment of the replication crisis, and it is profound. So we have a lot of people submitting grants and papers with research that's just made up junk. It's junk science. But today, it seems like you can be the president of a major university. You can be caught publishing medical data that was faked 10 years ago, and somehow you keep your job or you just get moved somewhere else. So that's a problem at the universities and that any of us who legitimately look to these resources and these studies to help validate the money that we're looking for, we're all vulnerable. But these are real hard talks between all of us and the universities and the people that in a lot of fields just don't have academic standards anymore. So that's a very kind of global look at it, and that's where my head is. But this one project, the one last project that I have going, involves a friend of my father's telling the story of a historical. He was a friend of my father's, and I'm good friends with the family. He was the first Black four-star general here in the United States, and his name was Chappie James. And I'm working to get his story told in film. Well, his story kind of hit the Atlantic magazine a couple of weeks ago, like a ton of bricks, and then it was on MS Now. And by the time it was done, it's amazing what was being said. So, make a very long story short, if you actually know the story of the person and you look at what pop culture and AI does with it, if you go look at that man right now, about half of what you see on YouTube or whatever is going to be somewhat truthful, and the other half is largely just made up stuff. But a lot of that stuff will come from credentialed researchers and historians and stuff like that. So we all need to take care, we all need to be aware of this replication crisis, the crisis when we cite data, and put pressure on the researchers that we cite. Look them in the eye and say, are these numbers you're showing me real? So thanks again for letting me get on the soapbox. And if there's anything I can do, great to see you, Max. Saw one of your trucks the other day.
We're getting closer and closer every day, sir. We're just waiting on Blue Steak at this point. We're coming.
You bet. Anything we can do.
Dave, I feel like every week we get, a couple thousand feet closer to your house. So we're getting there, sir.
Well, and very quickly, the answer to that last text me thing, your best resource for all these other HOAs is the Green Valley Council.
We have been working closely.
Yeah, they can get you all that information directly. So,
yep.
Yeah. Thanks again.
Okay. I think we're done for today. Unless anybody has anything else, I'm going to stop recording. And if people still want to hang on and chat, you're more than welcome to do that. Kevin, thanks for being here today. Great job. Really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll see you regularly.
Hey,
Hey,
hey Dave, I was telling Max, I gave him the handoff and said the first house we have to get turned up down there was your house.
You hear how